As we can already see in the war in Ukraine, wars always bring out the worst in people. That was not only the case today, but also back then. For example, in World War II, when the Japanese Empire brought one of its most horrific units into the world, which became known to this day for its cruel experiments on humans. We're talking about Unit 731. Unlike in World War II, Japan did not fight on the side of the Germans in World War I, but as an ally of the Entente, which is why they could count themselves among the winners of the Great War. As part of the League of Nations and in the spirit of disarmament and maintaining peace, Japan signed the Geneva Convention in Switzerland shortly afterward, which obligated them to prohibit bacteriological weapons. Since the horrors of large-scale poison gas attacks along the front became known during the World War I, efforts were made to prevent the use, research, and development of both chemical and biological weapons as much as possible. So while the whole world showed that such weapons should be banned and that such horrors must never be repeated, someone else saw something different in this ban, confirmation, in the fact that such weapons must be powerful and simply effective, because otherwise, people wouldn't want to ban them. We're talking about the Japanese doctor Ishii Shiro. He is convinced that Japan must not disarm under any circumstances, but rather should do everything possible to produce as many weapons as possible. Ishii Shiro was anything but stupid. He was described as very intelligent, if not even a genius. His completed studies at the Japanese elite university Kyoto also confirmed that he was indeed intelligent. His ambition and ruthlessness, combined with his ultra-nationalist attitude, were probably the reason why he wanted to use his talent and knowledge for the purposes of the military and the state, instead of for humanitarian services. During an audition, he convinced the Japanese military that the potential of biological weapons absolutely had to be exploited in order to use them as an offensive measure in the event of a war. In doing so, he also relied on the following scenario, namely, that other countries could attack with biological weapons themselves, and that Japan would therefore be defenseless. At that time, Japan had a problem. For the war, it usually needed large weapons. Large amounts of resources, especially iron and steel, were key elements in any weapons production, and Japan was severely lacking in exactly these resources. However, biological warfare can provide a solution. This would make it possible to kill a large number of people with extremely few resources, and those people could also spread diseases and pathogens to others. You would create an invisible weapon that could break the backbone of any attacker without having to spend steel on a single rifle, a single tank, or a single cannon. He convinced the military leadership and was sent on a 2-year world trip to understand and research the effects of known biological weapons based on scientific studies. During his absence, Japan changed radically. Japan became a victim of the economic crisis and was hit very hard by it. The balance of power also shifted to the right as Emperor Hirohito came to power, and with him, nationalist forces took control of the state apparatus. For the ultra-nationalist Hirohito, this was, of course, the perfect opportunity to present his ideas and results. That's exactly what he did. Again, he stood before the military leadership to present his ideas. But this time, the interest in his work was so great that they provided him with the resources. Right in the middle of Tokyo, one of the largest cities in Japan, the Institute for Epidemic Prevention. However, that was just a cover name because no epidemic prevention was supposed to take place here, but rather experiments for the development of their own bioweapons. For this purpose, they studied and experimented with known diseases such as anthrax or even the plague. And this was right in the middle of the big city, and that became a major problem for the population. To prevent a possible outbreak, the research was divided into 2 departments. There was the research area for attacks and offensive biological weapons, and the area for protection against diseases such as vaccine research. According to him, this kind of research can be conducted in Japan because it is meant to contain diseases, while aggressive pathogens should be researched abroad in order to protect the Japanese population as much as possible. At that time, the Japanese leadership also made their expansion plans clear and occupied the poorly protected Manchuria in the east of present-day China. The Japanese considered the local people to be of little value. They eventually came as colonists, founded the colony of Manchukuo, and became the owners of the land and also of the citizens. This was also very convenient for Shiro, since he didn't believe that weapons could be made only in the lab without testing them on a large scale. And for that, the new colony was perfectly suited. Many people, but they didn't live close enough together so possible outbreaks could remain localized and wouldn't be traced back to the Japanese. So a new research facility was established in the new colony of the Japanese Empire, and their research subjects were all those who were a thorn in the side of the government and society. Partisans, communists, insurgents, thieves, swindlers, and all those who harbored anti-Japanese sentiments were inmates of this camp. Various pathogens were tested on them, which were carefully selected and modified in the laboratory next to the barracks to study their effects on the prisoners. The average life expectancy at that time was about 1 month. In 1936, Shiro was given a new camp that was larger, more remote, and more isolated than previous ones. The reason was, after test subjects escaped in a clash with likely communist forces, Shiro destroyed the research facility to erase evidence of his crimes. He requested an even more secure location from the emperor and received it. To ensure the safety of the new facility, the so-called Institute for Epidemic Prevention was incorporated into the Imperial Japanese Army and made part of the large logistical and military network. The headquarters is assigned a unit that is supposed to take care of this secret area. We're talking about Unit 731. A new facility, which consisted partly of research laboratories and partly of barracks, and a prison for the prisoners, even gets its own airfield and a railway connection, which are kept secret. Prisoners are transported using these. It is also supplied by its own power plant and protected by several watchtowers, trenches, and other military fortifications. While inside, experiments on humans were carried out. Shortly after, World War II begins for Japan as well, and new tasks arise for Unit 731. What once began as pathogen research expanded into new areas thanks to military ambitions. Women were reportedly impregnated and infected with diseases in order to study the effects on the embryos. They also studied how the human body reacts to extreme conditions such as extreme cold or high pressure. For example, prisoners were locked in pressure chambers to test at what point their eyes would pop out. In addition to all these side projects, they produced tons of bacterial powder, filled it into bombs, and tested its effects. But that's not all. They also infected fleas and released them over the test area, just to see what the effects of such an attack would look like. At the war's end, Germany and Italy surrendered. Japan remained the last Axis power until atomic bombs hit Hiroshima and Nagasaki, leading to Japan's surrender. Meanwhile, Unit 731 frantically tried to destroy all evidence of its existence. Destroying the research results was even more crucial, as they must never fall into Soviet hands. They shot all forced laborers and prisoners, blew up all the unit's buildings, and destroyed numerous laboratories. They left behind only several million biological weapon components, infected animals that led to subsequent severe epidemics in the region, and the bodies of their test subjects, which were thrown into a nearby river. But what happened to Shiro? He personally took the most important documents and fled to Japan. There, he staged a fake funeral to pretend he was dead because he was afraid of being labeled a war criminal. And that's exactly what happened because his plan didn't work out. He got caught, and the Americans took him with them shortly after. To his great luck, the United States of America was also researching biological weapons, and according to their own statements, had no way to conduct human experiments due to ethical concerns. Why were the research results so important to them? But even more important to them was that because of the Cold War, the Soviet Union must absolutely not get these documents. Shiro negotiated a deal. He demanded immunity for himself, his superiors, and staff in return for the cruel experiment results. The Americans listened to the offer, thought about it, and accepted it as well, since they considered it more important than punishing the war crimes. But how do we know about this in detail if everything was actually kept secret? Let's go back to Manchuria once again. Shiro destroyed everything and fled. However, 12 members of the unit were unable to escape and were captured by the Soviets and put on trial. There, they explained what their mission was and revealed the actions of the unit. When that came out, the whole thing was dismissed by the West as a kind of communist show trial and propaganda. The 12 prisoners were released again after a rather short prison sentence, as they also passed on knowledge and results about the research work to the Soviets. None of the nearly 3,600 employees was ever seriously punished for their actions. Many of them took on important leadership positions in Japanese politics, as well as in the pharmaceutical industry after the war. These were exactly the people who, just a few years earlier, were responsible for one of the most horrific atrocities in the Pacific region.